It was an ordinary winter shift in Johannesburg, 2001. Miners clocked in, machinery hummed, and the company trucks rolled through the gates as they always did. By dawn, one man was missing. His name was Manuel Dlamini. The only trace was a faint smear of blood across the leather seat of a company truck parked in the yard. The search was immediate, frantic, but by noon it collapsed into silence. His family prayed, the company denied, and the community whispered. For 20 years the absence remained. No grave, no body, only rumors. Until a hidden transport log surfaced, sealed deep inside the mine's records, pointing back to one forgotten truck and one forbidden stop. That secret would bring the case crashing back into the light. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. Johannesburg, 2001. The night was heavy with the sound of generators and the dull grind of machinery echoing across the mine yard. Floodlights burned against the mist, washing the gravel ground in pale orange. Workers finished their late shift, trudging toward the gate with boots caked in dust. Among them was Manuel Dlamini, 31, broad-shouldered, his reflective vest streaked with grease. He lingered behind the others, his pace slower, as if weighed down by something unseen. The company truck sat near the loading bay, its white paint dulled by soot. It was one of dozens, but that night it stood out. The driver's door hung slightly ajar, the keys left dangling. Inside, the cab smelled of oil and rubber. A faint smear crossed the edge of the leather seat. Dark, sticky, and unmistakably blood. It was not enough to suggest violence, not yet. Just a trace, almost invisible in the sodium glow. Detective Elias Kumalo arrived before dawn. His unmarked sedan pulled up beside the gates at 5 a.m., headlights cutting briefly across the gravel. He stepped out, tall frame wrapped in a wool coat, clipboard already in hand. He had been summoned by a call from the local precinct. Missing miner, possible foul play. Elias had worked homicide, industrial accidents, and disappearances. He knew the rhythm of these places, the silence, the way people avoided eye contact when the story was only half told. The supervisor on duty, Gideon Van Rooyen, greeted him with a stiff handshake. Gideon's shirt was pressed, collar tight, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. He explained that Manuel never signed out after his shift. The last confirmed sighting was just after midnight, near the maintenance shed. Gideon insisted the company was doing everything possible, but his words carried little weight. Elias made a note. Supervisors always said that. The truck was the only anomaly so far. Its record showed it had been assigned to a night run, but had returned without cargo. The odometer reading was higher than expected, though no one could account for the miles. Elias leaned into the cab, scanning the floor mats for debris. He touched the stain on the seat with a gloved finger, then bent closer under the flashlight. The texture was consistent with dried blood. He snapped 2 photographs and sealed a swab into an evidence tube. By 7 a.m., the yard filled with murmurs. Workers gathered in small knots, whispering Manuel's name. Some shook their heads, others stared at the ground. Manuel had been popular, dependable. To vanish without warning was unthinkable. His wife, Nomsa, arrived soon after, her coat wrapped tight against the morning chill. She clutched a handbag as though it were armor. Her younger brother Saifo stayed close by her side, his face set in suspicion. They pressed Elias for answers, but all he could give was procedure. The search began in widening circles. Officers swept the maintenance sheds, storage lots, and perimeter fence. Dogs traced scents across the gravel but lost the trail beyond the truck yard. A boot print was found near the rear wheel, size 10, oil-soaked, pattern consistent with standard-issue work boots. Hundreds of men wore the same. It was evidence, but it was meaningless in isolation. Inside the security office, Elias reviewed the night logs. The sign-out sheet listed Manuel's name at 11:45 p.m. No departure recorded afterward. On the second page, one entry caught his eye. The line for truck number 7. Where the driver's name should have been, someone had written in pencil, then scratched it out until the paper tore. A second name had been scrawled above, initials only, barely legible. It was an error, or it was a cover. Either way, Elias marked it with a red tab. By late morning, the company executives arrived. Dark suits stepped out of black cars, their shoes too clean for the mine yard. They spoke quietly with Gideon, then disappeared into an office. The tension thickened. Elias knew the signs. The company was already protecting itself. The miner's family would be offered sympathy, maybe compensation. But the blood in the truck was not a technicality. It was a crime scene. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows between the parked vehicles. Elias walked the perimeter once more, noting the rhythm of the yard. Trucks in and out, records signed and stamped, all part of a machine too large to pause. He stopped at the vehicle again, staring at the smear on the seat. Small, almost insignificant, yet stubborn. The kind of trace that resisted time and excuses. That night, Manuel was officially declared missing. Posters would be printed, interviews arranged, rumors spread. But within the first 12 hours, the heart of the case had already formed. One man gone. One truck returned. One stain of blood. Elias sealed his notes, the page crisp with ink and careful handwriting. He looked once more at the truck as the floodlights buzzed to life. The cab door stood closed now, locked and tagged. Yet the image persisted, clear as daylight. A smear on leather. A silent witness. The investigation had begun, and the stain would not go away. The morning after the disappearance carried an uneasy quiet. The mine yard was restless, but the machinery droned on as if nothing had changed. Detective Elias Kumalo returned to the site at 8 a.m., armed with fresh orders to expand the search. He knew the first 24 hours defined everything. If Manuel Dlamini had walked off on his own, someone would have seen him. If he had not, traces would remain. Elias moved through the tunnels where Manuel had worked the night before. The air was thick with dust and metallic tang, the lights buzzing overhead. He crouched to inspect the ground near the tool shed. Oil stained the floor in irregular patches, but a single trail led away, darker and more deliberate. Boot prints crossed through the oil, pressed deep into the surface. Standard issue work boots again, size 10. They led out toward the yard, then faded where the gravel scattered. Elias ordered plaster casts. The impressions were fragile, but they were proof of movement. At the perimeter fence, an officer called out. A thin ribbon of fabric clung to the wire mesh, snagged where the metal bent outward. Elias took it in his gloved hand, a strip of blue reflective cloth, torn at the edge. It matched the safety vests issued to miners. He sealed it into an evidence bag, another thread pulling the story forward. By noon, Namsa arrived once more. She carried photographs of her husband, worn from handling. Saifo flanked her again, his frustration rising. They demanded answers the police could not give. Elias explained what they had found, the boot prints, the torn fabric, but offered no promises. He saw the despair in Namsa's face harden into determination. Families never waited quietly. They pressed, they rallied, and they held vigils until silence cracked. In the small cafeteria, workers gathered for lunch. Elias moved among them, listening to scraps of conversation. Someone said Manuel had seemed distracted the last week, lingering by the gates after his shift. Another mentioned an argument with the foreman Gideon, though details dissolved into shrugs. Elias marked each whisper carefully. Rumor was not evidence, but rumor often pointed the way. At 3 p.m., the security footage from the main gate finally came in. Grainy black and white frames flickered across the monitor. Trucks rolled past. Workers clocked out, the night unfolding in steady rhythm. Then, at 11:45 p.m., two figures appeared near the maintenance shed. One, tall, broad-shouldered, reflective vest catching the light. Manuel. The second, slimmer, dressed in a collared shirt. They stood close, gestures sharp, the scene nearly swallowed by shadow. The tape ended abruptly at midnight, the camera angle shifting as if tampered. Elias replayed the frames again and again. The outlines matched Samuel Mthethwa, the night guard, but the confrontation suggested someone with authority. He noted the time, the angle, and the abrupt cut. Forensic anchors did not lie, but they often hinted more than they revealed. That evening, search teams combed the surrounding scrubland. Flashlights cut across the dry grass, dogs straining against their leashes. At 6:10 p.m., a handler called out. Near the fence line, hidden beneath loose soil, lay a fragment of cloth. It was a pocket torn from heavy work trousers, streaked with oil and a faint smear of red. The blood tested positive for human origin. Elias studied the fragment under a portable lamp. It was not enough to declare a body, but it was enough to confirm injury. He imagined Manuel stumbling, bleeding, trying to climb the fence before being pulled back. The scenario was speculative, but the fragment anchored the suspicion. As darkness fell, Nomsa gathered neighbors at her home. A prayer circle formed, candles lining the porch. Voices rose in song, sharp and unbroken. Elias stood at the edge, his notepad closed. He knew these vigils mattered more than statements. They created pressure, the kind no company could ignore. Back at the station, he laid the evidence on the board. Photograph of the truck, swabs from the seat, casts of the boot prints, the torn vest strip, the pocket fragment. Each piece isolated, each pointing in one direction. Yet the body remained absent. Without it, the case was fragile. He stared at the photographs until the lines blurred. A miner vanishes after midnight. A truck runs unlogged miles. Bloodstains resist the wash. The narrative tightened like a noose. At 10 p.m., he closed his folder. Outside, the city lights flickered, and the hum of industry never stopped. In the silence of his office, he wrote the final line of the day's report. Evidence indicates struggle near vehicle. Subject likely injured. Location of body unknown. The ink dried slowly. The words felt heavier than their weight. The board of evidence glowed in the fluorescent light, anchored by a single photograph. A smear of blood on a seat no one wanted to claim. The third day began with cold light spreading over the mine yard, pale against the corrugated steel buildings. Detective Elias Kumalo returned with a team of forensic technicians, the pressure mounting. His orders were clear: secure the records, verify personnel, and uncover the trail left in ink. Physical traces could vanish. Paper had a way of enduring. Inside the administrative office, the air smelled of toner and stale coffee. Stacks of binders lined the shelves, each labeled with neat codes. Elias requested the logs for the midnight shift. A clerk hesitated, eyes flicking toward the supervisor's office before handing over a folder. The cover was scuffed, corners bent, as though it had been handled too often in too little time. Elias flipped through the sheets. The log of truck assignments was precise. Columns of vehicle numbers, names, times, signatures. Then one line stood out. Truck number 7. The driver's name written faintly in pencil, then scratched through until the page tore. Above it, a second name scrawled hastily in ink, initials only. The handwriting tilted downward, rushed, unlike the tidy records around it. Elias photographed the page, marked it with a red tag, and sealed it in an evidence sleeve. Forensic specialists dusted the paper with ninhydrin, the chemical mist leaving faint purple imprints. Partial fingerprints bloomed along the margins, overlapping. They would later confirm at least 2 sets of hands had altered the record. Elias summoned Gideon Van Rooyen, the foreman. Gideon's posture was rigid, arms folded across his chest as he sat at the narrow desk. He claimed the log was merely corrected for accuracy, nothing unusual. Elias pressed him on why pencil was used. Gideon deflected, saying the clerk had rushed and he had simply amended the entry. His words were calm, but his jaw tightened as questions narrowed. Leaving the office, Elias found Samuel Mthethwa, the night guard. Samuel was wiry, with sharp features softened by weariness. He admitted he had seen Manuel near the trucks around midnight, speaking with someone. At first he hesitated to name Gideon, but under Elias's gaze, he whispered that the argument had grown heated. He heard raised voices, but claimed he looked away. not wanting trouble. Elias recorded the statement, his pen moving in steady strokes. The logbook and Samuel's testimony aligned too closely to dismiss. Yet proof demanded more than suspicion. By late afternoon, Elias ordered the vehicle yard searched again. Forensic lights scanned every truck interior, every floor mat. In the rear of truck number 7, under the rubber lining, a small fragment of cloth was found, fibers consistent with a miner's trousers. The fragment carried a trace of dried blood, faint but enough to test. The sample was sealed, logged, and marked against Manuel's missing clothing description. Meanwhile, Namsa and Saifo arrived at the precinct. Namsa's eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, her voice steady but strained. She asked what the logbook meant, what the stain in the truck proved. Elias explained only what procedure allowed. To reveal too much too soon risked the case collapsing under legal weight. Saifo slammed a fist against the wall, demanding why the company remained untouched while Manuel's children asked where their father was. Elias remained silent, though his jaw tightened. That evening, the evidence board grew denser. Photographs of the altered log. Images of fingerprints revealed by chemical mist. Samuel's statement transcribed line by line. The fragment of cloth, sealed and numbered. Each item pinned in cold sequence. The story sharpened. A shift unrecorded, a truck repurposed, a man vanished. As the fluorescent light buzzed above, Elias studied the patterns. The handwriting slanted, the fingerprints smeared, the names concealed. The logbook was not simply sloppy. It was rewritten, its pages a battlefield of omission. At 9:20 p.m., Elias closed his file, exhaustion pressing at his temples. Yet the night refused to loosen. The truck remained silent outside, the blood stain fixed like an accusation. The log sheet lay sealed in its envelope, but its torn fibers seemed to whisper. 2 hands rewrote this night. He set his pen down, the words echoing in the stillness. By the 4th day, tension in the mine compound was visible in every glance and hurried step. The men worked their shifts under watchful eyes, but the rhythm was broken, disrupted by questions that refused to fade. Detective Elias Kumalo returned to the yard, this time focusing on the people who had seen what the logs could not show. Samuel Mathethwa, the night guard, was waiting near the gatehouse. He seemed smaller in daylight, his uniform wrinkled, eyes shadowed by fatigue. Elias guided him into the narrow security office, shutting the door against the hum of trucks outside. The recorder clicked on. Samuel shifted in his chair, hands restless. He repeated what he had told before, that he saw Manuel arguing with someone. This time, Elias pressed harder. The guard swallowed. "It was the foreman," he said finally. "Gideon Van Rooyen." They stood by the shed. I don't know what it was about, but Gideon's voice was sharp. Manuel raised his hands. Then they moved toward the trucks. Elias noted the time Samuel gave. Close to 11:45 p.m. It matched the gate camera footage, the blurred figures frozen in grainy frames. He marked the statement with a steady line of ink. Confrontation confirmed. From the office, Elias walked to the foreman's quarters. Gideon greeted him stiffly, shirt sleeves rolled, eyes wary. He dismissed Samuel's claim as nonsense, insisting he left the yard before midnight. His alibi was weak, a vague mention of paperwork and a call to his wife. Elias requested phone records. Gideon's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering to the window. By noon, the forensic team had retrieved additional footage from a secondary camera overlooking the maintenance bay. The tape was compromised, static breaking across the screen. Yet in one frame, the silhouettes of 2 men were visible, standing close, one taller than the other. A faint reflection from a safety vest caught the light. The timestamp, 11:45 p.m. Forensic anchors layered upon each other. Samuel's testimony, the altered log, the blurred footage. Each one fragile alone, but together forming a spine the case could not ignore. Meanwhile, whispers spread among the workers. Some claimed Manuel had spoken of unsafe machinery, of refusing to keep silent about a near accident underground. Others said Gideon had threatened him, warning that complaints reached the wrong ears. The rumors swirled, shaping into shadows Elias could not yet touch. That afternoon, Elias led a search inside the supply warehouse. Rows of metal drums stood stacked, their sides streaked with rust. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting hard shadows. Near the rear wall, one drum bore a smear of darker color, faint beneath a hurried coat of paint. Elias scraped gently with his glove. A thin flake came free, revealing beneath it a reddish-brown stain. He ordered luminol sprayed across the surface. Under blue light, faint streaks glowed across the rim. Wiped, but not erased. Blood. He photographed every angle, sealed swabs, and logged the container's identification number. The warehouse echoed with silence as if the walls themselves recoiled. Elias left the scene with his notes heavy in hand. The case had shifted. It was no longer just a disappearance. It was violence hidden beneath the hum of industry, painted over but still burning through. That night at 8 p.m., he met Namsa and Saifo again. He did not speak of Gideon directly, but he told them about the blood found on the drum. Namsa's face fell, tears sliding unbidden. Saifo clenched his fists, demanding arrests. Elias could only promise the work was moving forward. Back at the station, the evidence board thickened. New photographs, blurred figures on the tape, the drum glowing under luminol, Samuel's signed statement, each pin connected by red thread. Elias stared long at Gideon's name, written on the board in block letters. A shadow coiled around it. Near midnight, the precinct emptied of sound. Elias sat alone, reviewing the photographs once more. The blood glowed in his mind's eye, a secret painted over but still alive. The day's report closed with a line. Confrontation confirmed. Blood trace concealed in warehouse. Suspect, Gideon Van Rooyen. The words settled cold, unshaken by the silence that followed. The warehouse became the center of gravity. By the fifth day, police cordoned off the structure. Yellow tape stretched across its doors. The company tried to keep operations steady, but the sight of forensic vans parked outside unsettled the workers. Detective Elias Kumalo stepped inside with his team, boots echoing against the concrete floor. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by every movement. Rows of equipment lined the space. Drums, spare machine parts, crates labeled with faded stencils. The drum marked from the previous night stood in isolation, tagged and photographed. Today, Elias searched beyond it. He directed the team to sweep the aisles with portable UV lamps, scanning for traces invisible to the eye. Near the back corner, beside a stack of unused piping, faint streaks glimmered. They ran across the floor and up the side of a crate, nearly invisible in natural light. Elias knelt, his gloved hand brushing the rough surface. Under UV, the lines shone bright, diluted blood, wiped in haste. He ordered swabs taken, the samples sealed in tubes, marked with the time and crate number. One technician pried the crate open. Inside lay tools coated with grease, but beneath them, a rag was stuffed deep into the corner. Elias tugged it free. The cloth bore a dark stain, hardened with age. He sealed it, noting how the rag seemed to have been hidden deliberately. Another echo of violence too clumsy to erase. As the sweep continued, a clipboard was recovered from the crate's lid. Its surface was scratched, but faint impressions of handwriting remained. Elias slipped a forensic sheet over it, shading with a pencil. Words emerged. Transport 115. The numbers sharpened against the background. Undeniable. It was a time unrecorded in the official logs. The evidence now spoke of movement. Manuel had been hurt, contained, and moved. Where, Elias could not yet trace. Outside, the company's lawyers pressed against the cordon, their voices tight. They argued that operations were being delayed, that searches exceeded warrants. Elias ignored them. The stains glowed in his mind, cold beacons against the silence. By afternoon, he confronted Gideon Van Rooyen again. In the foreman's office, papers cluttered the desk, yet Gideon sat with arms folded, his stare fixed and unblinking. Elias presented photographs of the rag, the crate, the pencil impressions. Gideon dismissed them as misinterpretations, as contamination from years of use. Elias did not press harder. He simply noted Gideon's hand twitch at the mention of Transport 115. Later that evening, Elias compiled the day's findings. Blood stains traced across the warehouse. A rag hidden beneath tools. A note etched in graphite pointing to a transport unlogged. The forensic anchors layered into a new pattern: movement, concealment, complicity. At 9 p.m., he drove back through the mine gates. The floodlights buzzed overhead, casting the trucks in pale halos. He parked near number 7, the truck with the seat still marked by blood. The stain had dried darker now, but its outline was clear, mocking every attempt at denial. He wrote his final report for the night. Evidence indicates victim injured in warehouse. Concealment attempted. Transport at 1:15 a.m. unrecorded. He closed the folder with deliberate care, the silence of the yard pressing close. The rag, sealed in its plastic bag, rested on the desk under the harsh fluorescent light. Its stain glowed faintly, stubborn as memory. The 6th day opened with the sound of chanting drifting across the township. Nomsa Dlamini had organized a prayer vigil outside the gates of the mining compound. Dozens gathered with candles cupped in their hands, their voices carried by the cold morning air. Hymns rose steady, heavy with grief. For Detective Elias Kumalo, the vigil was more than mourning. It was a force, pressing the investigation forward where silence might have stalled it. Inside the compound, tension rippled. Workers filed past the crowd with eyes lowered. The company deployed extra guards at the entrances, their presence both deterrent and provocation. Gideon Van Rooyen walked briskly across the yard, his face set, refusing to meet the gaze of the families. Elias watched from a distance, noting how even authority seemed to shrink under the weight of song. By noon, officers expanded their sweep to the outer fence line. Children from the settlement had been playing nearby days earlier. One boy carried a scrap of fabric he claimed to have found in the grass. Elias examined it closely. A piece of heavy cotton, orange reflective stripe along one edge, torn unevenly. It matched the trousers issued to miners. More telling was the smear along one side, dark and greasy with motor oil. He sealed it in an evidence bag, its significance immediate. The forensic team mapped the fence area. Footprints pressed shallow into the dry earth, their edges blurred by time. One set, deeper and wider, led toward the service road. Another ended abruptly at the fence, where barbed wire sagged as though bent under pressure. Elias traced the metal, noting faint flecks of blood where skin had caught. The trail confirmed what he already suspected. Manuel had been moved, dragged, or forced beyond the yard. Back in the precinct, Elias pinned the new fragment to the evidence board. Threads stretched across the photographs, the logbook, the warehouse stains, the transport note, now the torn fabric. Together they outlined a path Manuel never chose to take. That evening, Nomsa arrived at the station with Sifo at her side. She carried a worn Bible, its cover cracked with urine. She asked Elias directly, "Have you found where they took him?" He hesitated, weighing procedure against compassion. He told her they had proof Manuel was injured and moved, but not yet where. Her eyes filled with tears, but her posture stiffened. "We will not stop," she said, voice steady. Sifo's fists remained clenched, his anger only sharpened. Outside, the vigil continued into night. Candles flickered against the dark, their wax pooling at the gates. Workers passed silently, unable to meet the eyes of the gathered. The company issued a brief statement of sympathy, but it only fueled suspicion. Silence had weight, and now it pressed heavy on every side. Elias drove back into the compound one last time before midnight. He parked near the fence where the fabric was found. The barbed wire gleamed faintly under the floodlights. He imagined the struggle, the tearing cloth, the stumble in the dirt. He crouched low, flashlight catching the faint smear of blood on rust. The scene was quiet, almost ordinary. Yet in the stillness, one truth echoed louder than the night. The fence had tried to hold a secret, but the blood refused to vanish. The 7th day focused on records, not soil. Detective Elias Kumalo walked into the transportation office with 2 officers, the stale air thick with cigarette smoke. A clerk sat rigid at the desk, fingers tapping against a stack of delivery slips. Elias requested every log covering the night of Manuel's disappearance. The clerk hesitated, then produced a folder, the paper edges crisp from handling. The entries appeared routine: vehicle numbers, cargo lists, departure and arrival times. But one slot stood blank. Truck number 7. Again. No cargo recorded, no destination marked. Instead, a space of silence where ink should have been. The page was stamped with the company's seal, yet unsigned. Elias felt the weight of omission more than any mark. He photographed the sheet, bagged the original, and ordered handwriting comparison later. Back at the evidence board, the missing cargo slip stood out like a void. A truck had moved, but no one had claimed responsibility. At 2 p.m., Elias returned to the yard with a forensic technician. They inspected truck number 7 in daylight, crawling over every surface. Under the floor mat, the technician uncovered something wedged deep in the seam, a crumpled corner of paper. Elias unfolded it carefully. A carbon copy slip, faint blue ink smudged. The words barely legible. Departure 1:15. No cargo listed. The same time noted on the shaded clipboard recovered from the warehouse. The patterns locked. He sealed the slip, his notes precise. Second independent record confirming unauthorized transport. As the team processed the discovery, a supervisor approached nervously. His name was Peter Latigan, a mid-level foreman. He admitted quietly that the truck left the yard around 1:15 a.m., driven by Gideon himself. Peter claimed he had been ordered to keep silent, threatened with dismissal if he spoke. He had obeyed until now, but the weight of the vigil outside the gates had changed him. Elias recorded every word, noting the tremor in Peter's voice. Forensic anchors now stacked. 2 documents, 1 witness, 1 time. The picture sharpened into a narrative of concealment. That evening, Elias returned home late. His desk lamp cast shadows across the evidence board. Photographs of the seat stain, the logbook with erased names, the rag from the crate, the cargo slips. Each pointed to a single night run, unrecorded and unauthorized. Manuel had been moved at 1:15 a.m., concealed in a truck meant to carry ore, but instead carrying silence. Elias wrote his final report for the day. Unauthorized transport confirmed. Driver identified as Gideon Van Rooyen. Time 1:15 a.m. He set down his pen, the silence around him absolute. Pinned at the center of the board, the carbon copy slip gleamed faintly under the lamp, the faded ink carrying more weight than 1,000 words of denial. By the 8th day, the investigation shifted beyond the mine's perimeter. Detective Ilias Kumalo secured a warrant for the company's internal vehicle tracking system. It was rudimentary, based on early GPS transponders installed in a handful of trucks. The technology was unreliable, often ignored, but data lingered where men lied. Inside the small control office, rows of monitors displayed static maps. A technician retrieved the archived logs, transferring them onto a dusty terminal. Lines of coordinates scrolled across the screen, timestamps marking movements through the night. Elias leaned closer. Truck number 7 registered a departure at 1:15 a.m., confirming once more the time already etched into evidence. But there was more. The signal traced north along the service road, then stopped abruptly at 1:32 a.m. The system flagged no contact for nearly 40 minutes before the truck returned to range near 2:15 a.m. That dead zone marked a gap in the company's story, a place the vehicle should never have been. Elias printed the data, overlaying the coordinates onto a topographical map. The dead zone aligned with a stretch of disused land 5 kilometers north, an area once used for storage, now abandoned. He circled it in red ink. By afternoon, Elias led a convoy of officers to the site. The land was barren, scattered with rusted equipment, weeds breaking through cracked concrete. The air smelled faintly of oil and stagnant water. They fanned out, boots crunching on debris. Near the center, one officer called out. A patch of soil appeared disturbed, its surface uneven compared to the surrounding ground. Elias crouched, pressing his hand against the earth. The texture was looser, softer, as though recently dug. He ordered the ground probed. Within minutes, the rod struck cloth. Shovels cut into the soil, exposing a fragment of blue fabric stained dark with old blood. It was workwear, standard-issue trousers, torn at the knee. Inside the pocket lay a small coin pouch, embroidered with a faded pattern. NAMSA would later confirm it belonged to Manuel. The site yielded no body, only clothing. Yet the significance was undeniable. Manuel had been here, injured, hidden. The truck had carried him to this ground, then returned empty. Forensic photographers documented the find, each angle captured under harsh sunlight. The samples were sealed, the coordinates logged. Elias stood over the disturbed soil, his expression fixed. A void remained where a body should have been, but the trail was no longer speculation. That night, in the precinct, he pinned the printed GPS route to the evidence board. Red ink circled the dead zone, photographs of the soil taped alongside. The carbon slip, the warehouse rag, the logbook, all connected by one line on a map. He closed his notes with precision. GPS confirms unauthorized stop. Clothing recovered, stained with victim's blood. Body absent. The board loomed above him, a network of stains, prints, and paper trails. Each thread pulled tighter, yet the center remained empty. At 11:45 p.m., the room silent, Elias stared at the photograph of the trousers sealed in plastic. The fabric was mute, but the blood still spoke. The 9th day began with shovels striking harder ground. The disused lot had yielded clothing, but no remains. Detective Elias Kumalo authorized a full excavation of the disturbed soil. Under the rising sun, officers dug methodically, sifting earth through gloved hands. Dust rose, drifting across the weeds. At 10:30 a.m., a shout carried across the site. A fragment of leather boot emerged from the soil, cracked and stiff. It bore the company's issued pattern, its laces frayed. Inside, a smear of dried blood darkened the lining. Elias ordered it bagged immediately. Photographs captured every angle, the boot lying half buried as if reluctant to surface. The dig continued. Hours passed with nothing more than stones and rusted scrap. Then, beneath half a meter of clay, a bundle of fabric surfaced. A miner's work shirt, sleeves torn, collar stiff with congealed blood. No body, only echoes of one. DNA swabs later confirmed the blood as Manuel's. The absence of a corpse deepened the mystery. Elias stood over the pit, clipboard under his arm, considering the evidence. Manuel had been here, hurt, stripped of clothing, then taken again. It was not just concealment. It was relocation, deliberate and methodical. In the afternoon, Elias returned to the precinct, where forensic technicians prepared reports. The shirt's fibers matched the reflective strip found at the fence. The boot print casts aligned with the sole of the recovered boot. The puzzle pieces clicked together with mechanical precision. The ground had confirmed what rumor could not. Manuel's injury was severe, his removal orchestrated. At 5 p.m., Elias interviewed Samuel Mathethwa again. The guard admitted seeing the truck exit the yard that night, headlights off, Gideon at the wheel. He confessed his fear, how Gideon warned him that silence meant safety. Elias recorded every word, voice steady despite Samuel's shaking hands. The evidence board now carried new weight. Photographs of the boot, the shirt, the excavation pit. A red line stretched from the yard to the dead zone. Another line returned to the mine. The truck had made its journey like a vein pumping secrecy back into the compound. Still, without a body, the case remained fragile. Prosecutors demanded certainty. Rumors would not convict. Blood without flesh was evidence, but juries needed bones. That night, at 9:45 p.m., Elias stood in the yard again. Floodlights hummed, shadows cutting sharp across the trucks. He imagined the boot buried, the shirt folded into earth, the trail looping back. Gideon moved through the shadows of his mind, always one step ahead, always with silence for an alibi. Elias wrote his closing note for the day. Clothing and boot recovered, stained with blood. No body located. Evidence indicates relocation of remains. He pinned the boot photograph beneath the board's central thread. The cracked leather looked almost human, its silence more accusatory than words. The boots sat under glass, mute but unyielding. The 10th day turned the case inward, into the mine's core. Detective Elias Kumalo requested access to internal safety reports. The company resisted, but the warrant overrode their protests. Boxes of paper files were carried into the precinct, dust shaking loose from every binder. Elias spread them across the table, page after page of incident logs. Most reports followed routine: equipment malfunctions, minor injuries, delayed shipments. But buried inside one folder, he found a document that jarred the pattern. Dated the same week as Manuel's disappearance, it described a minor accident underground, allegedly resolved without harm. The signatures at the bottom caught Elias's attention. The safety officer's name was written neatly, but Gideon Van Rooyen's signature loomed beside it, ink darker, dated 2 days earlier than the report itself. The mismatch was glaring. Elias traced the paper with his gloved hand. Forensic analysts confirmed the ink of Gideon's signature predated the rest of the entries. It was a forgery, an accident report written after the fact, meant to preempt questions. By late morning, Elias confronted Gideon again. In the interview room, fluorescent light cut sharp across the table. The foreman leaned back, arms crossed, lips set tight. Elias slid the forged report across to him. Gideon barely glanced at it before dismissing it as clerical error, but his eyes betrayed unease, flicking to the recorder, then away. At 2 p.m., Elias interviewed Peter Lodigan once more. The mid-level foreman now spoke more freely. He admitted hearing rumors of a fatal accident that week. A machine malfunction underground, a worker pinned. Peter believed Manuel had been involved, gravely injured. But the company's decision was swift. No fatality would be admitted. Compensation costs were too high, inspections too dangerous. Gideon ordered silence, and the cover-up began. The forensic trail aligned. Blood in the warehouse, transport at 1:15 a.m., clothing buried in abandoned ground, a falsified safety report. The story coalesced into something colder than murder. It was corporate preservation, the deliberate rewriting of a life into an incident resolved. That evening, Elias mapped the network on the evidence board. Red threads stretched between Gideon, the safety officer, and the transport logs. Blue pins marked the blood traces, clothing fragments, forged documents. The pattern formed a web not of impulse, but of system. At 8:30 p.m., Namsa came to the station. She asked about the new findings, her voice quiet but sharp with resolve. Elias told her carefully that the company had rewritten the truth. She nodded, her gaze hardening. "They erased him on paper," she said. "But the blood won't erase." Her words echoed the photographs pinned across the wall. Each smear of blood, each fragment of cloth, spoke louder than a stamped report. At 10:15 p.m., Elias closed his notes. Forged accident report recovered. Evidence indicates systemic concealment. Motive, avoidance of liability. The forged document lay sealed in plastic under the harsh white light. Its ink was still dark, but the lie beneath it was transparent. The signature glared from the page, a silent betrayal captured in ink. The 11th day began with a new lead. Overnight, investigators had pressed Samuel Mathethwa harder. Exhaustion cracked his silence. He admitted that on the night Manuel vanished, Gideon ordered him to guard the far gate, away from the truck yard. Samuel obeyed, but hours later he saw headlights near the old concrete silos inside the mine grounds. He swore he heard the hollow clang of chains and the grinding echo of something heavy being lowered. His fear silenced him for weeks. Now, the memory returned with the force of confession. At dawn, Elias led a team into the restricted sector of the compound. The silos stood deserted, their steel husks corroded, the ground littered with weeds pushing through cracks. A faint smell of cement hung in the air, stale but persistent. Elias ordered the floor scanned with ground-penetrating radar. The images came back irregular. Beneath one slab, a void gaped where solid concrete should have been. Jackhammers shattered the surface. Dust rose in clouds as officers pried apart the hardened layer. Beneath lay a cavity filled with poured cement, its surface uneven. riddled with cracks. Excavation crews chipped steadily until fragments gave way, exposing cloth hardened into stone. A sleeve protruded, then a torso, encased in gray. The body had been hidden in cement, entombed within the silo. The forensic team worked with surgical precision, extracting piece by piece. Manuel's form emerged, his protective gear still clinging in fragments, his helmet crushed along one edge. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. His chest caved under impact. In his hand, curled tight even in death, lay his lunch tin, dented yet intact. Inside, sandwiches remained, blackened by time and decay. Elias stood over the recovery, notebook in hand. The silence among the officers was absolute. Cement had become a coffin, the company's final act of concealment. By afternoon, Nomsa was brought to the station. She sat in silence as Elias told her they had found her husband. Tears streaked down her cheeks, but her posture was rigid, unbroken. Saifo paced the corridor, fists clenched, muttering curses too low to capture. The forensic anchors piled high, photographs of the cement slab, Manuel's crushed helmet, the dented tin lunchbox. Each item was sealed, numbered, and tagged. At 7:40 p.m., Elias wrote the day's final note. Body recovered in cement silo. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. Concealment, deliberate. Pinned at the center of the board, the photograph of the lunch tin gleamed beneath the harsh light. Ordinary, battered, yet damning. The tin whispered of a life interrupted, sealed in stone. The trial began 18 months later, in a Johannesburg courtroom lined with wood paneling and the low murmur of restless voices. Detective Elias Kumalo sat at the prosecution table, his evidence stacked in binders, photographs clipped in sequence. At the center of it all, the dented lunch tin rested inside a clear case. A small object, but one that spoke louder than testimony. Gideon Van Rooyen entered in a dark suit, his face pale, eyes darting but never settling. Alongside him sat two managers from the mining company, their lawyers whispering in urgent tones. The charges read out: culpable homicide, conspiracy to conceal death, falsification of safety records. The words cut the air, formal yet heavy. The forensic anchors unfolded in court with the precision of a scalpel. First, the blood smear on the truck seat, photographed under harsh light. Then the altered logbook, its torn fibers magnified for the jury. Next, the warehouse stains revealed by luminol, glowing like ghosts across metal. Finally, the cement-encased body, photographs laid out in sequence until silence filled the room. Witnesses followed. Samuel Mathethwa recounted the night of silence at the gate, his voice trembling but clear. Peter Latigan confirmed the order to keep quiet, the threats of dismissal. Experts traced the ink of forged signatures, the GPS route to the abandoned lot, the fibers of clothing unearthed from soil. Each piece isolated, each point cold, but together a story that no denial could erase. Nomsa sat in the gallery, her hand folded tightly around her Bible. Her gaze never left the evidence, her face a mask of grief hardened into resolve. Saifo sat beside her, his jaw clenched, eyes burning at every mention of concealment. After 3 weeks, the verdict came. Guilty on all counts. Gideon Van Rooyen was sentenced to life imprisonment. The two managers received lesser but still heavy sentences. The company issued apologies, but their words fell flat, drowned beneath the weight of proof. Elias closed his final report with care. Case concluded. Justice rendered. Systemic concealment exposed. The words felt clinical, yet final. But justice carried no comfort. The community around the mine fractured. Trust corroded like the steel of the silos. Families spoke in whispers about what else might lie buried beneath concrete. Workers carried suspicion into every shift. 1 month later, Nomsa visited the site where her husband had been found. Rain fell softly, streaking across rusted metal and broken slabs. She placed the restored lunch tin on the ground, flowers inside where sandwiches once lay. The mine gates loomed behind her, their sign rusted, letters peeling. Elias stood at a distance, watching in silence. The case was closed, the files archived, but the image would not leave him. The rain fell harder, soaking the flowers until petals clung to steel. The tin remained, dented, unyielding, a relic of truth sealed in stone.